we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trusts in these islands, that thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Any objection to confirming the minutes of the 2nd of June? There appear to be none. Minutes confirmed. There are no messages from the governor. Announcements. The Honorable Member Tene Ferbert will be absent. Also, the Honorable Member Craig Kennedy will be absent. I have received for the information of the House the Auditor General's report on the implementation of recommendations from selected government-related entities dated June 2023, which has been submitted to the Speaker in accordance with Section 1013 of the Bermuda Constitution Order 1968 and Section 10 of the Audit Act 1990. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Papers and other communications to the House. Minister Hayward.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the Economic Development Strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Hayward. There are no petitions. Statements by ministers and junior ministers. The first one from the Honorable Deputy Leader Walter Roban.
Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker. Good morning, members of the House and listening public. Mr. Acting Speaker, I rise today to inform the Honorable House on steps required to obtain a death certificate. I begin by acknowledging the fact that the loss of life is never easy to accept. The Bermuda population is not immune to death, and as a small jurisdiction, we experience our share of deaths, not just deaths of local residents, but also deaths of visitors to the island. Each year, the Registry General records a number of deaths that occurred in Bermuda for the calendar year. For example, the year ending the 31st of December 2021, there were a total of 730 deaths recorded. This figure consists of 727 deaths for residents and 3 deaths.
One second, Minister, pause. There's no statement on the website. It's there now? Okay, sorry. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. The figure consists of 727 deaths for residents and 3 deaths for non-residents. While we often hear the comment that death is a natural part of life, Bermudians, like most members of modern society, struggle with the loss of a loved one. And for some, it is only their faith that sustains them through their moments of grief. Compound the loss of a loved one with the unfortunate delay in the issuance of a death certificate to the deceased family members only prolongs their grief, as they are not able to settle the affairs of the deceased. We appreciate, Mr. Acting Speaker, a perceived delay in producing these documents can interfere with closure for a family or loved one, but also the completion of such things as estate planning or probate. This is important business that families may be dependent on being properly settled. These are things that the registrar understands and always takes into consideration with whatever work he does in this area. Mr. Acting Speaker, a death certificate can only be obtained from the Registry General Department. The registration of a death and the issuance of a death certificate is a statutory requirement which the department is governed by the provisions of the Registration, Births and Deaths Act 1949 in providing this service. Pursuant to Section 11 of the Act, the registrar must be notified that a person has died in Bermuda. The Registrar General is notified of a death by either a medical practitioner, hospital, funeral home, or by the coroner's office, or the magistrate where an inquest is held on the body of the deceased person. Pursuant to Section 12 of the Act, the notification of death is via an application to the Registrar General on the prescribed Form E, known as the Particulars of Death. The application is submitted with the payment of the relevant prescribed fee of $35. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Registrar General Department understands the sensitivity where death of a person or loved one has occurred and processes these applications as a matter of urgency. The department has internal performance measures and applications for a death certificate are processed within 10 days from receipt of the Form E. The death certificate is produced and the applicant, i.e. such as a funeral home, is contacted immediately to advise that the death certificate is ready for collection. However, Mr. Acting Speaker, when the coroner's office or the magistrate or are reviewing a particular death, the Registry General Department cannot process or issue a death certificate until they have received the Form E, death notice, from either the coroner's office or the magistrate's court. These reviews or inquests of the body of a deceased person by the coroner's office can take months and sometimes over a year to conclude, which delays the Registry General Department from registering the death and issuing a death certificate. Also, delays in producing a death certificate can occur when the Form E submitted by funeral homes contains errors that are detected at the verification stage of processing, and the Registry General Department has to send the Form E back to the funeral home to be corrected. It should be emphasized that certificates must include the full legal name of the deceased. Mr. Acting Speaker, you will note that often you see obituaries which contain the name of the person that he or she is known by and often includes their nickname. However, the name may not be the full legal name of the deceased. Often this occurs with funeral homes because they have not been provided with the full legal name. If the full legal name is not on the Form E, the death certificate cannot be processed and can result in delay. Mr. Acting Speaker, in closing, the process of obtaining a death certificate is straightforward and guided by the Registration, Births and Deaths Act 1949. The registrar has to be first notified via Form E that a death has occurred in Bermuda. Once notified, the death is registered and a death certificate is issued. Only when the Form E is incorrect or the death is under review, an inquest is held by the coroner's office or the magistrate's court, is there a delay in the issuing of the death certificate. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Rabon. The next speaker is the minister's statement is from the Honorable Colonel Birch.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Just a
Morning.
little distracted. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to report on the successful training of another 40 young Bermudians within the horticultural industry through the partnership between the Skills Development Program. July last year, I provided details of a similar week-long training regime that is intended to enhance the skills of participants in the areas of horticulture and arboriculture. The horticulture training included focus on propagation, plant identification, soil science and testing, pests and diseases, cultivation, bed preparation, planting, pruning, and risk assessment. The arboriculture training included focus on operation, repair, and maintenance of chainsaws, cross-cutting, tree biology, risk assessment, felling of trees, tree pruning, and first aid. Last year, 35 young Bermudians took part in this training program, Mr. Speaker. This year saw 40 young Bermudians taking part. These participants were from various organizations across the island, including the Department of Parks, the Corporation of Hamilton, Redco, Coral Beach Club, the Department of Youth, Sport and Recreation, Port Royal and Ocean View Golf Courses, and the Palm Grove Gardens. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that this year's training was actually oversubscribed, so much so that unfortunately there was a waiting list. We hope as the program continues, all interested parties will have the opportunity to engage in future courses. Mr. Speaker, since 2015, the SDP has provided a safe environment to host hands-on training opportunities for young women and men in or interested in the horticulture industry by empowering participants with life skills and enhance their opportunities to qualify for employment. As mentioned in the July 2022 statement, the SDP board began this partnership in 2019 with Kingston Marwood College, located in Dorset, England, to develop and deliver a series of training programs that will be conducted by expertly qualified staff from the school. Mr. Speaker, as it can be inferred from this statement, since 2019, this government has assisted in training 75 young Bermudians so far to gain valuable skills for the horticultural industry. Each of the successful participants received a certificate from Kingston Marwood College for completing the training, which ranged from the basic horticulture and arboriculture to advanced. With this certification, it is anticipated that these individuals' opportunities for educational scholarships and/or employment will increase. Mr. Speaker, I must congratulate this year's participants, which saw a 100% completion rate, and special kudos must be given to the trainees who won the most outstanding awards. These individuals being Mr. Kadre Jacobs, Mr. Kenan Tucker, Mr. Dexter Wilson, Mr. Gladstone Butterfield, Mr. Oscar Riley, and Mr. Seth Pearman. Mr. Speaker, the trainers assessed all the participants and they will identify those who may be suitable for an 8-week customized training program to be held at Kingston Marwood College in the future. I'd also like to thank the training team of Mr. James Colville and Ms. Steph Addison from Kingston Marwood College, who both traveled to our island to share their expertise. They were ably assisted by 2 local persons from the Department of Parks, Mr. Jimmy Harvey and Mr. Tracy Wright. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, thank you to all of the technical officers within the Department of Parks for providing opportunities for those in the local horticulture industry to improve their skills. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Speaker, we have to give Mr. Roger Paris and his team recognition as the lead of this program. Without his tenacity and fundamental belief in giving young Bermudians the option to better their skills, this program would not exist. Thank you, Mr. Paris, for all you have accomplished, and government looks forward to seeing how your team will expand in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Colonel Birch. The next speaker is Minister Wilson, and Minister Wilson, you have 2 statements, right?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker and honorable members, I rise today to announce the launch of a one-of-a-kind public health information app by the Department of Health called Healthy People BDA. In 2019, the Department of Health promised to deliver an app as part of the vaccine uptake, vaccine hesitancy strategy to provide information on vaccines, Department of Health services, and related health information. We had to delay the launch as a result of the pandemic, but I am pleased to announce that the Healthy People BDA app has officially launched and is available to download now from the App Store and Google Play Store. Mr. Speaker, the app features the following: the vaccination schedule, where you can find out what vaccines you should have had according to your age based on Bermuda's vaccination schedule. A milestone guide with information about your child's developmental stages, and immunization services, where you can find the locations and the times for your next vaccination. Mr. Speaker, users can access the vaccine checker feature by inputting their birth date. The app will show where they should be on the vaccine schedules, view developmental milestones, and clinic services. Users can subscribe to receive messages, push notifications, in-the-know news notifications, view the gallery, and view upcoming community events. Mr. Speaker, this app provides the community with easy access to vaccine and child health information, and most importantly, is a space for reliable health information. The app is part of a multi-pronged approach to increasing the community's trust, knowledge, and participation in Bermuda's immunization program. Mr. Speaker, I encourage everyone to download the Healthy People BDA app today from the App Store or Google Play Store. It is an innovative vaccine resource and a valuable platform to share information on vaccination in Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker and honorable members, I arise again today to provide COVID-19 public information and guidance. Unfortunately, there is evidence of increasing COVID-19 infections in the community. However, the good news is that we are in a better position to manage the outbreaks because of the high vaccination rates and a less deadly virus strain. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind the public to continue taking precautions to avoid catching and transmitting COVID-19, such as practicing social distancing, good hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, including washing your hands frequently, covering your mouth and nose with a bent elbow or tissue when coughing and sneezing, and disposing of the used tissues immediately. Mr. Speaker, if you suspect you have COVID-19 symptoms, take a home antigen test or contact your healthcare provider. Regardless of symptoms, if you test positive for COVID-19, you should isolate for a minimum of 5 days from the positive test date. Close contacts of persons who have tested positive for COVID-19 should monitor their health for symptoms and test for a minimum of 5 days from the date of last exposure. And individuals can contact their healthcare provider for further guidance. Additional precautions may be required in certain settings, including but not limited to schools, long-term care facilities, etc. Mr. Speaker, most positive cases of COVID-19 are not reported to the Ministry of Health with the increased use of self-testing in the community. However, the Ministry of Health can monitor trends based on what is reported from select healthcare providers and facilities, including BHB, and monitoring of outbreaks in schools, long-term care facilities, and other individual sites. Reports through this mechanism that I've just described, insofar as surveillance systems, indicated the following, Mr. Speaker. The number of cases reported in May doubled compared to April, but remained less than the number reported in March. There was an accompanied significant increase in hospitalizations in May as compared to April and March. This increase appears to be continuing through these early days of June, with a few patients currently receiving treatment in hospital, and there have been no ICU admissions. Mr. Speaker, as reported, there was a COVID-related death in March and one additional death in May. There have been 8 recently reported COVID-19 outbreaks among long-term care facilities, schools, child care facilities, and another identified site. 3 of these outbreaks have been resolved, and the others are still ongoing, with the individual sites having advised those concerned in accordance with guidance from the Epidemiology and Surveillance Unit. Individual sites may consider additional precautions based on their own circumstances. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 vaccines will become available in the autumn. However, COVID-19 antivirals and therapeutics, Paxlovid and Molnupiravir, are available now in Bermuda by prescription only from your physician. Oral antivirals stop the virus that causes COVID-19 from making copies of itself in your body. They have been taken by millions of people and successfully treat mild to moderate COVID-19 in persons at high risk of becoming seriously ill. These pills can help people infected with COVID-19 avoid hospitalization or death. Paxlovid and Molnupiravir are available to the following patients, Mr. Speaker. Paxlovid, adults and children 12 years of age and older, weighing at least 88 pounds or 40 kg, who are at a high risk for getting very sick from COVID-19 and have mild to moderate symptoms. Molnupiravir, which is for adults 18 years and older who are at high risk for getting sick, very sick from COVID-19 and do not have access to other COVID-19 outpatient treatment options or other options that are inappropriate for them or who have mild to moderate symptoms. A doctor can check your eligibility for oral antivirals and prescribe them if appropriate. Oral antivirals are taken as soon as possible after testing positive for COVID-19, no later than 5 days after your first symptoms appear. And these pills are taken at home 2 times a day for 5 days. Mr. Speaker, the reporting of COVID numbers ceased on the 31st of March, 2023, as indicated on the government website. Summary updates on COVID-19 and other conditions under public health surveillance can be found at www.gov.bm/health information. This page is updated weekly on Wednesdays, and although it does not report specific COVID numbers, it does provide an indication of whether the country is experiencing an increase in cases. Again, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the public to continue taking precautions to avoid catching and transmitting COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Wilson. And the next minister statements from the Honorable Member Vance Campbell. Minister.
Good morning, and thank you, Deputy
Morning.
Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the purpose of the Public Access to Information Act, known as PATI, is to give the public the right to obtain access to information held by public authorities to the greatest extent possible, subject to exceptions that are in the public interest or for the protection of the rights of others. PATI was passed in 2010 and came into force in 2015. Since the implementation, public authorities have encountered some challenges along the way. As mentioned by the Premier in the 2023-2024 budget statement this year, my statement today about reviewing and updating PATI and the PATI Regulations 2014, referenced as the PATI Regulations, should therefore not be a surprise. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the harmonization of PATI and PIPA debated today in the Personal Information Protection Amendment Bill 2023 is only one area where PATI has been examined and amendments recommended and progressed through a collaborative exercise. There are various avenues where PATI and the PATI regulations are reviewed and recommendations brought forth to the government for consideration. For example, annual reports from the Information Commissioner, the independent regulator for PATI, have been laid before this House annually since 2015, meeting the requirement under Section 58. Additionally, under Section 57 of PATI, the Information Commissioner may investigate and report on the operation of the Act. The most recent special report was delivered in 2021, which provided the findings from the review of PATI's implementation and provided recommendations. Recommendations are also received from citizens and public authorities. Finally, overseas jurisdictions are examined to see how best practices used in mature public access to information or freedom of information regimes operate. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a number of areas are currently under review, and PATI amendment bills will be brought forth over time. As mentioned earlier this year, the PATI PIPA unit works with the Information Commissioner and others, discussing various recommendations which may result in these future amendments. There are also elements from other jurisdictions that have been under consideration by the government. One such area has been how other jurisdictions charge fees in their freedom of information regimes. To this end, the government has determined to proceed with the development of a reasonable charges for PATI concept that looks to the appropriate limits and fees regulations in the UK Freedom of Information and Data Protection Regulations 2004. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as with many other jurisdictions, it should be noted that Bermuda has a fee schedule in place that allows public authorities to charge for production costs in responding to petty requests such as photocopying, production of photographs, video duplication, copy of microfilm, and other conversion costs. The review of charges beyond production costs in other jurisdictions primarily included fees for searching and retrieving records. They varied in areas where costs were assigned to other steps in the process of responding to a request, such as preparing a record for disclosure, examining, reviewing, preparing a schedule, redacting, decision-making, and communicating internally with the requester. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have to ensure that the public has access to the information of public authorities to better understand the reasoning for government actions. This enables transparency and accountability, both hallmarks of a democratic government. At the same time, we must ensure that public authorities are able to continue their business remits and obligations. Unfortunately, a number of requests have placed an undue burden on some public authorities in order to manage the requests. Mr. Deputy Speaker, while this represents a shift from the earlier intention to charge an application fee for petty requests, the reasonable charges for petty concept will require the implementation of a fee structure and will thus ensure that at least some of the costs of responding to requests are recouped. Like the UK regulation, a limit of working hours which would be deemed appropriate to respond to a request will be implemented. If it is estimated that a request would take longer to fulfill than that time limit, the public authority could either deny the request or ask the requester to narrow the request or invite the requester to pay a fee for the extra hours to fulfill the request. A flat fee per hour would be set for this work. The Bermuda framework would potentially establish 16 hours or 2 working days as the limit, together with a $60 per hour fee thereafter. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the way this would work is as follows. If the public authority, after locating and reviewing the necessary records for a request, believes that the request will exceed the limit, they will produce a time estimate for the requester. If the time estimate is less than the time limit, the public authority will process the request according to the existing petty procedure and at no charge to the requester. If the estimate is more than the limit, the requester will be invited to narrow the request in order to not incur a fee or be invited to pay the fee, or the public authority can deny the request. The requester will be given a time frame to agree, dispute the estimate, refine, or withdraw the request. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this petty charges concept will alleviate the burden on public authorities in responding to petty requests and will serve to recognize that petty requests are not the only demand on the resources of public authorities. Reduce the impact on time, energy, and finances of public authorities to the extent that they negatively affect the normal public and operational functions of authorities. Requires requesters to focus requests to a more manageable size that can be accommodated by information officers. That is, allow requests, yet encourage the requester to set appropriate limits. And D, enable aggregation of requests over a defined time frame from the same requester or requests from several persons appearing to be acting in concert. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the reasonable charges for petty concept will also necessitate the creation of tools, guidance, and training on the application of time limits and fees if the requester wishes to go over the limit. This would be required to ensure consistency of implementation across public authorities. It will also aid in minimizing any variance or difference in response. Additionally, public authorities have a statutory duty to assist requesters. making every reasonable effort in connection with their requests. Finally, I remind you that requesters will have the right of review, as they will have the opportunity to ask for an internal review of the decision based on the estimate and subsequently a commissioner's review. Consultation on this concept and other petty amendments will take place with the Information Commissioner. I look forward to sharing continued developments in this area. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement is from Minister Hayward. Minister Hayward.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in this honorable house today pleased to have tabled a bill entitled Amendments to the Child Daycare Allowance Act 2008. Mr. Speaker, the bill is but another step towards financial assistance reform and confirms government's continued commitment to ensuring families have access to child daycare services. Mr. Speaker, the impact of the global pandemic means that, like all other businesses, the cost of operating child daycare services in Bermuda has increased, resulting in added financial pressure being placed on families. The increasing cost of child daycare has added to the economic stresses for parents. As a result, the ministry will increase the child care allowance benefits and expand the pool of parents who can qualify. These amendments will provide many families the opportunity to afford suitable child care for their children. Ensuring families have access to child care is extremely important, as it gives children the opportunity to develop the social, emotional, and cognitive skills required to prepare for primary school and beyond. Mr. Speaker, the inability to afford child care may inadvertently force parents to opt out of going out to work and instead choose to stay home. Subsequently, staying home to care for one's child could prove to be a more suitable and beneficial option for some families. Mr. Speaker, currently the allowance prescribes a maximum gross annual income of $55,000, with a maximum award being $800 for an eligible child. This allowance does not adequately cover the growing cost and warrants reforming the child daycare allowance program. The ministry will implement a new tiered financial award specifically for child daycare services as pledged in the 2022-23 speech from the throne. Eligibility with respect to the proposed tiered system will be based on an annual gross household income as follows. $65,000 equals a maximum monthly allowance of $900 per child. $97,000 equals a maximum monthly allowance of $700 per child. And $130,000 equals a maximum monthly allowance of $500 per child. To this end, Mr. Speaker, the members of this honorable house should expect subsequently to have tabled amended child daycare allowance regulations to introduce and effect the new tiered rates. Mr. Speaker, the government acknowledges that families are finding it difficult to meet the needs of their households, particularly with respect to ensuring that children are provided access to daycare services in alignment with what they can afford. The ministry's proposals to reform the child daycare allowance is indicative of the government's unwavering commitment to ensuring the well-being of all of Bermuda's children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Hayward. And the final statement is from Minister Weeks. You have the floor, Minister.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in our increasingly digitized world, we are ever more dependent on the internet and information technology to process our sensitive information and support critical services. These technologies represent significant economic and social opportunities for Bermuda. However, they also represent increasing risk that we must address. The cyber threats we face continue to increase in frequency and sophistication with potentially devastating effects. Mr. Speaker, around the globe, many public and private sector organizations have faced damaging cyber attacks. Municipal governments, including the cities of Baltimore, Atlanta, and New Orleans, have experienced cyber attacks that disrupted city services and required millions of dollars for recovery. As a result of a cyber attack on its systems, the city of San Francisco was locked out of its own network by a rogue IT staff member. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, Costa Rica was targeted by a series of cyber attacks that are estimated to have cost more than $30 million per day and required the government to declare a state of emergency. There have even been incidents of cloud service providers and hospitals closing after being targeted by devastating cyber attacks. These incidents demonstrate the extreme threat that cyber attacks represent to all of society. We must continue to identify and understand the cyber threats we face and implement adequate protections against them. This must include the ability to detect, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Security has been working diligently to help ensure that Bermuda has adequate capabilities to defend against cyber threats. After conducting an assessment and capacity building workshop with the International Telecommunications Union and Bermuda Critical Infrastructure stakeholders, the ministry developed a plan and structure for a dedicated cybersecurity unit. When this unit is operational, it will establish and operate the Bermuda Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. The unit will also provide specialized cybersecurity resources and capabilities to support the protection of Bermuda critical national infrastructure entities within both the public and private sectors. Mr. Speaker, in addition to providing on-island cyber defense resources and capabilities, the unit will also provide cybersecurity training and opportunities for Bermudians to gain experience and skills in the important and growing field of cybersecurity. We must develop our local resources and capabilities in this area to avoid becoming overly dependent on overseas vendors, contractors, and service providers. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Security, in close collaboration with local stakeholders and experts from the Council of Europe, developed a plan to update Bermuda cybercrime-related legislation to align with requirements of the internationally recognized Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. The Budapest Convention on Cybercrime is a multilateral treaty that promotes international standards and cooperation for the prevention and prosecution of cybercrime. 68 countries are signatories to this agreement. Mr. Speaker, the legislative aims and drafting instructions have been approved by Cabinet, and Parliamentary Council is currently drafting the updated legislation. Alignment with the Budapest Convention will help support the effective investigation and prosecution of cybercrimes within Bermuda and facilitate international cooperation to address cybercrimes that cross international boundaries. Working in close collaboration with Bermuda stakeholders, the Ministry of National Security developed and obtained Cabinet approval of drafting instructions for new cybersecurity legislation, which is currently being drafted by Parliamentary Council. This legislation will enable a framework to help ensure that Bermuda critical national infrastructure entities implement and maintain adequate protection against cyber threats. Mr. Speaker, at the community level, given the rise in the number of cyber scams in which people have been duped into giving personal financial information to scammers, it is important that members of our community protect themselves by being aware of unscrupulous cyber criminals and their devious tactics. For example, people should be suspicious of emails that are received from unknown senders or emails that request personal or financial information. To protect themselves, people should never share their passwords, banking details, or PIN numbers in response to an email request or to an unknown caller, for example. Mr. Speaker, in order to raise awareness of the perils of cybercrime, government has run programs and media alerts regularly in the community. These programs provide information to seniors and school children about online cyber safety, cyberbullying, and secure computer practices. We intend to continue this awareness campaign to ensure that the message of cybersecurity is reinforced throughout the community. Mr. Speaker, members of the Ministry of National Security Cybersecurity Team and the Disaster Risk Reduction and Mitigation Team assisted experts from the UK Home Office with conducting a national cyber risk assessment earlier this year. The assessment covered 9 critical infrastructure sectors and included meetings and interviews with 29 Bermuda critical infrastructure entities within government and the private sector. In March, the UK office delivered their report and recommendations, and the Premier and I reviewed these with Her Excellency the Governor. I am pleased to report that most of the findings and recommendations from the report are already addressed in our National Cybersecurity Strategy and Government Cybersecurity Program. The areas not already addressed will be considered when we update the cybersecurity program and strategy during the current fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Cybersecurity Unit will be implementing systems to provide independent logging and monitoring to support the detection and investigation of attacks against critical government IT systems and information. This logging and monitoring capability will be provided and maintained independent of the IT staff, vendors, and contractors who implement, operate, and maintain government IT systems. Independently maintained logging and monitoring is an industry recommended best practice. This segregation of duties is necessary to protect against potential attacks by rogue insiders and external vendors or contractors who may attempt unauthorized access to government information and IT systems. Independent logging and monitoring is also important to help ensure that rogue insiders, external IT vendors, and contractors do not violate the privacy of government IT system users. Mr. Speaker, in the coming months, the Ministry of National Security will work with the Cybersecurity Governance Board, experts from the International Telecommunications Union, and Bermuda Critical Infrastructure stakeholders to update the Bermuda Cybersecurity Strategy and seek approval for the updated strategy from Cabinet. The Internal Government Information Systems Risk Management Committee, chaired by the Permanent Secretary of National Security, will also work to continue the development and implementation of the government cybersecurity program to ensure government IT systems are designed, implemented, operated, and maintained with adequate security. Mr. Speaker, in closing, updating and implementing the Bermuda Cybersecurity Strategy and Internal Government Cybersecurity Program will help ensure that we continue to address the ever-evolving cyber threats that impact both our public and private sector critical infrastructures. The Cabinet Cybersecurity Committee, of which I am the chair, also includes our Deputy Premier, the Honorable Walter Rabban, and the Honorable Vance Campbell. The committee is working diligently to support cabinet-level direction and oversight of cybersecurity within the government and across Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Weeks. The next item is reports of committees. There appear to be none. We have a question period, and there are questions for 4 ministers so far. The first being Minister Rabban, MP, Honorable Member Jackson.
Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Speaker. My question to the Deputy Premier is around the death certificate. So there were 730 deaths in 2021. We know that there have been a number of deaths due to COVID. And I'm wondering if the Deputy Premier might be able to give us an update on any delays that are being caused, in particular due to deaths caused by COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. There are no such delays to my knowledge or based on the information from the registrar.
Jackson, any further?
Yes, I am aware, Deputy Premier, that there have been delays issuing death certificates because of COVID and establishing that as a cause of death. So my second question or supplementary would be, yes, is the government working with the coroner, which is in the magistrate's court, to make sure that any delays that are caused through establishment of the death certificate, especially around the cause of death, whether the government is working with the coroner to work through this and expedite the issuing of the death certificates?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. The office works with the coroner as a matter of law. It has to, because as I stated in my statement, it is one of the entities that the information that is used to prepare a death certificate comes from them. So it's legally required that they work with the coroner. But in more direct to the member's question, absolutely. Any issues that arise with the processing, the department works with the coroner to expedite as best we can.
MP Jackson?
Yes, my other question is, can the Deputy Premier please just give us some indication of what the government may be doing, the Registry General in particular, to keep families either informed or up to date on delays? The Deputy Premier mentioned can be up to a year, because people cannot get into their bank accounts, they can't get on with their lives, and to think that they're waiting an entire year for a death certificate. So my question to the Deputy Premier is, what is being done to actually speak with the widow or widower or the family members so that they have some sense of what's going on and during that delay?
Minister?
Thank you. As one can refer to my statement, Mr. Speaker, the registrar is very mindful of those sensitivities. And it was one reason why I wanted to make sure it was mentioned in my statement. But for the understanding of the member and the listening public, the client of the registrar is not the family. It will be either the coroner, the funeral home, or the magistrate's court. And that is whom the registrar must deal with directly to produce the certificate, receiving that Form E. Obviously, if the family contacts the registrar would do their best to be informative to them. But from the standpoint of how the law operates, that is whom the registrar must communicate with due process. And we encourage, and I'm certain, and I know that the registrar encourages any family who raises a concern with them to make sure that they are in contact with the funeral home, the registrar, like coroner or the magistrate's court, depending on the circumstance of the death.
Thank you, Minister. MP Jackson?
Yeah, this is a Hail Mary question, but is there any ability for families to submit any feedback or submit complaints if they do feel that it's been over a year and they haven't received a death certificate and they don't know what's happening?
Of course, I often receive those concerns myself, and certainly any family who may raise a concern can always make that aware to the registrar. There is nothing stopping them, but it's important that people still understand how the process works. And I can assure you, I've had these discussions with the registrar, and everything is being done to make sure this process works as smoothly as possible because of those sensitivities, which we are very, very mindful of.
Anything further, MP Jackson? No. Anyone else? Any questions? The next is for Colonel Birch, and it's the Honorable Hedley Cole Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Before I ask the question, can I just, like the minister, commend Roger Paris and his team for their commitment and energy in supporting the horticultural training program's success. I know they do a great job.
Yes.
My question is this, Mrs. Deputy Speaker. In the interest of our environment, can the training provided be opened and extended to the general public for general interest and not just for professional qualifications or professional development? We have a lot of people that are interested in the environment, horticulture, and I think this may be useful to them, retirees, it may be useful to them, and it could be a means of raising revenue for the program.
Minister Birch?
Mr. Speaker, there's been no consideration of that as thus far in a formal way, but there are two options. One, they can go to the Bermuda College where there is a course, and there is an informal interaction with members of the public that those are involved in the community gardens. And so there is a parks officer that participates and regularly collaborates with all of the people that are involved in parks, in community gardens across the island.
Summons, anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. What about just for the development of our local trees, the cedar trees, the preservation of cedar trees, the olive woods, all of the indigenous trees that form Bermuda's canopy? I understand what you're saying about community gardens, but I'm thinking more about arborists and the protection and cultivation of our trees for our canopy.
Colonel?
Mr. Speaker, we'll have a look at it. And clearly there are staffing challenges and what have you, but we'll see what we can do in that regard.
Thank you, Colonel. That's it. The next question is to Minister Campbell from Mr. Richardson. MP Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and good morning.
Morning.
I would thank the minister on his ministerial statement, page 4 of 6, where he outlined a number of options relating to the proposed fee structure or PADI charges concept. So title, and a number of those have options in them about how they're going to work, would potentially or may or could. To advance this project and give the House a little bit more information, would the Honorable Minister be able to tell us when they anticipate presenting legislation to bring these PADI charges into effect?
Minister Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I mentioned in my statement, there is some consultation that still has to happen with the Information Commissioner. There are also some physical challenges as far as some of the public authorities cannot receive funds. There's no apparatus. So I'm advised that currently there is a solution to that being worked on, and it's a digital solution that will potentially operate through the website, the government website.
Thank you, Minister Campbell. Anything further?
Yes, thank you. Supplemental.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Honorable Minister mentioned that the Information Commissioner will be involved with the consultation. Would the Honorable Minister be able to outline how wide or expansive this consultation will be? Will it be limited only to the Information Commissioner?
It is my understanding that this is something the Information Commission has expressed support for in the past. So we don't anticipate a wide consultation. We do want to put this in place as quickly as possible. But as far as I'm advised, the Information Commissioner has expressed and some support for a process that would use limits of this sort based on the UK model.
MP Richardson, anything further?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, second question. Would the Honorable Minister clarify when the legislation comes forward that he's anticipating bringing it under the affirmative resolution instead of negative?
Minister Campbell.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't have that answer right here
Okay.
because we're still developing what the policy is going to look like. So if I can defer and bring that answer to the honorable member at a subsequent time.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Richardson?
No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Deputy
Okay.
Speaker.
Thank you. There's a question for Minister Weeks from Mr. Richardson, MP Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again, my question relates to the minister's statement on pages 2 of 5, where he's talking about establishing the Bermuda Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. Would the honorable minister please provide some further detail? For example, where's this team going to be located within the various agencies, staffing and cost? Thank you.
Minister Weeks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to the honorable member's question, the cybersecurity response team will be located in ministry headquarters, and we are in the process of putting it together. So if there's any cost to doing that, I would bring that to the House at a later date.
Thank you, Minister Weeks. MP Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Second question, please.
Mhm.
The honorable minister mentioned the Parliamentary Council is currently drafting the updated legislation. My question is, when does the honorable minister anticipate bringing that legislation to the House?
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that. As soon as possible, it is with the drafters, as I said, so as soon as possible.
Thank you, Minister. Anything further, Mr. Richardson?
Yes, sir. Next question. The honorable minister raised that the UK office delivered a report and recommendations to the premier and himself, which was reviewed with Her Excellency the Governor. He mentioned that some areas in that report are not currently addressed in the cybersecurity program in Bermuda. Would the honorable minister please outline what those areas are and any significance they have towards noncompliance with the Budapest Convention?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are some areas that are being looked at, and hence that's why we're putting together the cybersecurity unit. When they are together, they will investigate the areas that need to investigate, and if need be, I'll bring them to the House.
Thank you, Minister. Any further questions, supplementary?
Yes, I have a supplementary.
Mhm.
So does that mean that Bermuda as a jurisdiction can sort of pick and choose what we're going to have in the convention? The reason I'm asking that is I just was Googling the Budapest Convention, and they have things like under a criminal investigation, your internet usage can be used. And so, I don't know whether something like that would be what we would want to do in Bermuda. And I'm just so asking, will we have a chance to pick and choose what we include in our
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Obviously, we'll be doing all that we can to protect not only our critical infrastructure, but our general public.
Any further questions? That's it. Okay, that brings the end to the question.
Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do
Minister.
have an answer for the honorable member on his question. And
Continue.
the response is this statement and the policy would result in fees. It would have to come before this House as far as a positive resolution.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Pearman?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, when this House set 2 sessions ago on the 19th of May, a question was put to the Premier regarding the date on which his fintech advisor, Mr. Dennis Pitcher, was to switch from being a paid role to an unpaid role. 4 weeks ago, the Premier undertook to bring the date to the House and to answer that, and the Speaker directed him so to do. 2 weeks ago, when you were in the chair, Mr. Acting Speaker, you will no doubt recall that the Premier said that he would undertake to give that information by the close of that sitting, by the close of business that day. We still haven't had the answer. We'd be grateful. Thank you, Mr. Acting
Okay,
Speaker.
I'll mention it to him. I'm sure he's forgot. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you'll let me go back to my speech.
Certainly.
Mr. Acting Speaker,
I didn't see.
these offices are very busy. I did receive the answer at 12:37 PM 2 weeks ago on Friday. I apologize for not providing the answer. The last date of payment was March 2021.
Thank you, Premier. The next order of business is congratulatory and obituary speeches. The chair recognizes the honorable member, Colonel David Birch.
Mr. Speaker,
Uh-huh.
I only want to talk and give congratulations on one matter today, and that is the celebratory weekend for the graduates of the Bermuda Institute last weekend.
Mhm.
Let me first declare my interest. The parliamentarian in grade 8 was Miss Samari Lee Birch, my great niece.
Oh, well,
The president in the graduating class of 2023 was Miss Zian Birch, my great niece. Mr. Speaker,
well.
Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you how proud the entire Birch, Givens,
Amen.
Keynes clan were at the graduation ceremony, not just for our relatives, but for all of the graduates. The Bermuda Institute has, I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist, let me just say that. I'm an honorary Seventh-day Adventist. But their parents and my brother and his wife and my sister are converted to Seventh-day Adventists. And so they've grown up in that faith their entire life. These two students went to Bermuda Institute for their entire school careers.
Right.
And I just, I make an effort to support young people, period, but particularly in my family. And I'm so pleased. I've spent years telling them off that give me notice. And so they gave me plenty of notice this year because it was a big occasion. And so I was able to attend on the Thursday, which is the grade 8 graduation, where they're graduating from middle school and going to high school. And then I was able to attend on Sunday, when it's the graduation for those students that are graduating out of Bermuda Institute. There's also 2 other days, Friday and Saturday as well, which is part of the whole graduation process. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the whole weekend was just one of upliftment and encouragement for the future of young people in this country and what they're going to do for us. I do, you don't have the clock on, so I don't know how much time I've got left, but I do want to put into the record, not just my relatives, but the 12 students who graduated, all of them, Mr. Speaker, you could sense that these young people have been together, most of them, their entire school year. And so they were so bonded and so together and so committed and so enthusiastic about their future and what they're going to do to this country when they go on to graduate. So Kamari Lee Bean, Zian Birch, Michelle Cadet, Sebastian Davis, Sonny, I'm going to leave out the U, Abanto, Adrian Fox, Dylan Fox, Zaria Hill, Sequoia Lightbun, Amaya Peets, Gabriella Larattery, and Zaire Torini. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the House send congratulations to Bermuda Institute on an outstanding graduation weekend and an outstanding program that they have to train up young people in the way that they should go. These young people are Christian young people who have a Christian education.
Yes.
And I can tell you that my eldest great niece is as serious as a heart attack, Mr. Speaker. She gave a speech at the graduation, and I told her at lunch that she could take my place in Parliament if she wanted to, because it was that impactful. And she said, no, thank you. So she will make a contribution somewhere else, but I look forward to following the career of all 12, and I will do anything that I can to help them in their quest. Thank you, Mrs. Speaker.
Thank you, Colonel. Are there any further? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member Zane De Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask the House to send condolences to the family of Mrs. Alma Jeanette Simons, who passed away a couple of days ago. She is the mother of Leonard Shiner Simons. Mr. Acting Speaker, she would have been married 71 years next week to the great first Shiner Simons from Somerset. Many of you may know the great Shiner Simons. Associate Mr. Weeks, Kim Swan, and
myself.
Minister Wilson. Lord, the whole house, and Red,
Yes.
the whole house. Yes, as I said, Mr. Speaker, she would have been married for 71 years last year. And while we're on marriage, her son, Shiner Jr., and his wife, Michelle, will be married 41 years next week. So he's certainly following the footsteps of his mother. She was a quiet lady, Mr. Speaker, quiet lady, but she was also a powerful lady who ruled with authority, but also had a very, very warm smile. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have to mention one little quick thing if I can. I wish I could show you all the picture, but his mother, Shiner's mother, was in hospital last week, and he sent me a picture with a note. And he says, and I'll quote if you don't mind, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Continue.
Thank you for condolences to the executive. My mother, at 92, she controlled everything. And he showed some pictures of her with a phone in the hospital bed the night before she passed away, Mr. Speaker, at 7 o'clock. And if she weren't calling you on the phone, she was using WhatsApp, and something I don't do is Facebook. So at 92, she was pretty sharp indeed. So my condolences do go to the family. And whilst I still might have 20 seconds left, Mr. Deputy Speaker,
Just so you got.
I'd like to congratulate all the security staff at the hospital, at the airport, the Bermudian security staff, because they do a hell of a job down at the airport. And I don't ever remember them being thanked for their work. And they do have a tough job down at the airport. And that's our people down there. In fact, one of them is one of our minister's mother. I think she still works down the airport. So I give thanks to them because it's a tough job that they have, and one that they do very, very well. So I'd like to congratulate them.
Minister Weeks.
Mr. Acting Speaker, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I too have to declare my interest in both of these matters. Firstly, Mr. Acting Speaker, the Harrington Sound Primary School was yesterday awarded the recognition of an eco school. The school was awarded the coveted and globally recognized Green Flag by the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute. This honor is given to a select few around the world of schools or organizations who have made a commitment to sustainability and caring for the environment. Harrington Sound is now considered among the elite around the world as an eco school. The principal of Harrington Sound is Mrs. Cindy Lee Weeks, Mr. Acting Speaker.
She related to you? She's not related, no relations.
Secondly, Mr. Acting Speaker, congrats to the Harrington Sound Primary School for its winning of the primary school relay classic last night at the National Sports Center. This is the 5th year straight, Mr. Speaker, that they have accomplished this feat. Under the direction of Mr. Corey Tito Smith and Ms. Linda Hines, the PE teachers, this school is once again the top primary school in this arena. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair recognize the Honorable Member Levita Fugo. I write the names down, and when I see you get up, so that's how I call them.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like congratulatory remarks to go out to the graduating class of Clearwater Middle School. This will be the final graduation for middle school students from that institution. It was a spectacular event. It went off extremely well. I would like for congratulations to go to St. David's Primary. They had a very small graduating class, but their theme was small but mighty. And the graduates in their accomplishments were indeed mighty. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate East End Primary for their end of year event presentation. It was spectacular. Much of St. George's was out to see them, and I would like to associate MP Renee Ming with these remarks. Mr. Speaker, on a sad note, I would like to send our condolences to the Gibbons family, the Gibbons-Fogo family in particular. Mr. Shirley Granville Gibbons, did pass away. He was buried yesterday. He was definitely an ambassador for Bermuda, a taxi driver for many, many years, and got the award for being one of Bermuda's best drivers in that arena and one of Bermuda's best ambassadors. Mr. Gibbons leaves behind his daughter, Elizabeth Roque, his son, Granville Gibbons Jr., and his loving wife, Gardine Fogo Gibbons, who are suffering a great loss, and the St. George's community are suffering a great loss with the loss of Shirley Gibbons. He was once a councilman in St. George's, and so he did provide public service to the community, and so that can't go unnoted. So, Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I do take my seat.
Thank you, MP Fogo. The next speaker is Kim Swan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I'd like to be associated with the remarks given by MP Fogo with regards to East End, St. David's, and Clearwater schools, and also associate with the condolences to on the passing of my friend, Mr. Shirley Gibbons, one of the first persons I met when I came to St. George in my connection with the golf courses, as his property bordered our property, and we had to make our way through that property to get from the first to the second hole. Very dignified man. He was a member of the Corporation of St. George's at that time. You may see his son, who's so well dressed with his hat and shorts and jacket, always Granville walking through the city of Hamilton, looking ever so smart. And I had to comment at the viewing to him that he certainly personifies his father as he carries himself in such a dignified manner. Mr. Shirley Gibbons will be surely missed, and he made a great contribution to the community that he grew, that he lived in. Mr. Acting Speaker, I'd like to have recognized the training that took place with the Bermuda government, as espoused earlier by the Minister for Works, the Honorable David Birch, and single out Mr. Oscar Riley, who works for the Bermuda government golf courses, and I associate the honorable member Jason with that, and Honorable Zane De Silva, as Oscar was the top student in that there. Hill House, as I've got to also recognize that on Saturday at Vasco da Gama, I attended Portugal Day and was honored to be able to bring greetings on that behalf with the significant contribution of the Portuguese community to Bermuda. MP Weeks wants to be associated with that, and also the Bermuda National Trust, whose awards outline so many contributions by persons in Bermuda to both heritage and to the environment, but most notably all the young recipients that were there. And finally, to a visitor, Boat International CEO Toby Moore, who I had the honor of being in his presence this week with his contingent, which included 9 super yacht captains
to be able to get familiar with Bermuda. Many said, boy, we often see Bermuda as we're passing by, but haven't had the experience of Bermuda's golf courses and Bermuda's hospitality, and in particular, I'm sure St. George's, when they went down there. I think a lot of these boats will start to make their way to Bermuda as they're making their way across the Atlantic, which bodes well for our economy. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Honorable Member Walter Robon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Speaker. I wish to be associated with the remarks from particularly Minister Weeks to the students and their recognition for Harrington Sound. Always happy to hear of young people who have taken the issues around the environment seriously, and the recognition they're getting for that they got from BVI. So always happy to hear of those things when they do happen. Also would like to, Mr. Acting Speaker, give recognition to the SDG Disruptor Summit that was held last weekend on the day of World Ocean Day, which was last Thursday on June 8th. It was a gathering sponsored by Bermuda Asset Management under the leadership of Mr. Kevin Richards. And it was the second such conference, and it brought together international as well as local young people around issues around sustainability, around the SDG goals, and what can be done to advance Bermuda's own aspirations in this key area. It was a fantastic event to be involved with, and I just feel that it's wonderful that young people in their own way are taking a lead on environmental awareness and sustainability in Bermuda. It's so important because the future is theirs to shape, and it's very good that they are now looking to set the agenda in this area. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Deputy Premier
Acting Speaker.
Robon. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member Diallo Ravane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to join everyone in congratulating all of the schools that have conducted their leaving ceremonies since we've last met. Mr. Speaker, St. George's Preschool, Success Academy, Dalton E. Tucker Primary, Northlands Primary, Paget Primary, and of course, St. David's Primary. Also want to congratulate Purvis Primary, who will be converted into a parish primary school. So they did not have a leaving ceremony. They had what they called a transition ceremony. And it was more of a celebration. And I'm sure members would have heard about they have formed their own Gombe troop, and they were at the school last week, Friday, with that. Again, Mr. Speaker, joining in with Minister MP Fogo, congratulations to Clearwater Middle School, but I also want to add congratulations to Heron Bay Primary as well, who both conducted their leaving ceremonies over the last couple of weeks, both of which will be the last leaving ceremonies for those particular institutions. The 8 students from Heron Bay and the 20 students from Clearwater, we wish them well as they transition on to their next stages. And we also wish the students that currently are at the schools well as they transition to new schools in September for that. I also, Mr. Speaker, people have spoken about Oscar Riley and congratulations to him, but there's a double celebration for him and his family this week. Last week, we celebrated the 17 new teachers that have graduated from the BTIP program, which is the Bermuda Teacher Induction Program. It's a 2-year program that all new teachers must undergo prior to them being fully into the classroom without mentors. And one part of that 17 teacher cohort was Ms. Renee Riley, which is Mr. Oscar Riley's wife. And so it was a double celebration for them this week. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, while it really does behoove me, I wish to send congratulations to Bailey's Bay Cricket Club for winning the Cricket League this year.
The chair recognizes Honorable Cole Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to associate myself in regards to the comments made for St. David's Primary School, Clearwater Middle School, East End Primary School, Harrington Sound School, and the Portuguese National Day celebrations. Mr. Speaker, As we speak now, I'd like to extend congratulations to Warwick Preschool. They are currently, as I speak, having their end of year program. And the theme is "We Are a Rainbow of Possibilities." So congratulations to all the Warwick Preschool graduates who are walking across the stage, so to speak, as we speak. I associate the whole house with that, those remarks. I'd like to send congratulations to Bermudians, Jonathan and Nicholas Christopher. They are professional actors who performed on Broadway in the musical Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Their play was nominated for the Best Musical Revival, and those two gentlemen actually performed at the Tony Awards, which is phenomenal. So again, congratulations to our Bermudians who are doing great things in the arts overseas. I'd like to also send congratulatory remarks to Liz Bowden. She was appointed as the new head of veterinary studies at the University of Edinburgh. She will take up the role at the Royal Dick School of Veterinary Studies, and she will be the first Bermudian and second woman to hold this role in 200 years. So again, Bermudians are making their mark. Bermudians continue to make their marks globally, and I wish them all the very best and success in their future. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also send congratulatory remarks to our friends in St. David's and their powwow. It was a very enlightening, it was a great cultural experience, a great cultural exchange, and it was a great celebration of St. David's heritage and traditions. So again, congratulations to the organizers, and it was a great event, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honorable member Darius Richardson.
One day. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to be associated with the remarks from the opposition leader relating to St. David's Islanders and Native community powwow, celebration of our ancestors. I think there's a lot of people in Bermuda who say the things that we should do, and then the organizers of that event have brought it to life. And that similarly, and at about the same time, National Portugal Day was celebrated by Vasco da Gama. And what that reminds me of, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the rich tapestry that is Bermuda and our culture, our history, of all the people that have come, all the people who have gone. Bermuda is definitely unique, and it's unique because of all of these things. So I definitely would like to congratulate the organizers of National Portugal Day and the St. David's Powwow Islanders and Native community. With that being said, also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the In Motion School of Dance, who put on a fantastic recital again this year under the leadership of Liz Pimentel and all of the choreographers. This year, there was a very compelling, thought-provoking, and profound reflection in dance on Black History Month. And given what we've seen in the last 5 years, it was a great examination. And the choreographers and the students should be acknowledged and thanked for a very profound night. With that being said, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the Honorable Christopher Famous.
Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker, I come with some sad news to announce passing of two of my constituents, Mr. Neil Pierman, father of Neil Jr., Jessica, Paulette, and Jacqueline, husband of Ian. All right, folks won't be associated. Mr. Speaker, more directly, I need to give honor to a lady, Marguerite Viola Lynch.
Yes.
She was the wife of PLP stalwart Richard Doc Comrade Lynch. the man who was the cornerstone of Devonshire PLP after Dame Lewis and Freddie Wade. The man who set the foundation for MP Terrell and myself. Mrs. Lynch was a stalwart at Harriet Chapel, African Methodist Episcopal. She was a stalwart boiler, but more importantly, she was a mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and a friend to all. Harriet Chapel could not hold everyone who came to her service this week, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
She spent many days taking my son and my daughter to Harriet Chapel, and she was the mother of my best friend, Seward Lynch. Mr. Speaker, some folks often get overlooked, and I want to take a moment to thank the staff at Agape House because they are there for our loved ones in the, I wouldn't even just say time of need, but in their last moments. And more importantly, they're there for us when our loved ones transition. So often they get overlooked, and Agape Health could use some TLC. So I would encourage members, if they want to be generous, go and help out the Agape House because those folks down there give the all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Famous. Is that Mr. Lister?
Good morning, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker. Good morning to the listening audience. I first just want to start off on a sad note by sending condolences. This week has been a tragic week on our roads. We've had 3 road fatalities, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And while all 3 of them, neither are Bermudian, there were 2 tourists and 1 a foreign guest worker. I still would like to just mention their names and be able to send condolences. Mr. Jerry Colentus was a guest worker at the Swizzle Inn on South Shore. And 2 tourists, Miss Angela Meyer and Mr. Dwayne Presti. So even though they are not Bermudian and their family's not here, we still just like to recognize and send condolences to their families because whether they Bermudian or not, a loss on our roads, it's still a loss on our roads, Mr. Acting Speaker. On a lighter note, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to send congratulations to the Somerset Cricket Club under-11 boys cricket team who won their age group cricket league undefeated this season, Mr. Speaker. And it's just following on from the Somerset's under-15 boys football team this season that also went undefeated in the league and the knockout, and also the Somerset girls team. So, Mr. Speaker, Somerset is doing something right.
Yeah,
Hopefully we get back to our Silver City days.
It stops right there.
And as a sign of what's to come, and there's 2 holidays in August, Mr. Acting Speaker. So congratulations to the Somerset Cricket Club under 11 boys cricket team. And I also would like to follow on from the comments from Minister Birch earlier. I'd like to send congratulations to the graduating class, the 2 graduating classes of BI, the 8th grade and the 12th grade, Mr. Speaker, that graduated this past weekend. But I'd like to also just add a little to it that the 2023 12th grade graduating class, it ages me, Mr. Speaker, because I actually graduated from BI 20 years ago this month. 2003 class of BI, Mr. Acting Speaker. So I have aged myself a bit. Hopefully I still look young. But again, send congratulations to that class. And as I said, hopefully in 20 years' time, they can look back on the next class graduating. And Mr. Speaker, I wasn't able to make it to the graduation, but I can always look forward to giving back to the school because as an alumnus of that school, I wouldn't be who or where I am today without that school. And as the minister did mention, it is a school of prophets. So I only hope that I can continue the school of prophets. And I can only hope that I continue in a good path, Mr. Prophets. PROPHET, Mr. Speaker. But if there's comments, I take my seat and thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Speaker.
I'm glad you take a seat. Yeah, Mr. Lister has some issues. That'll be solved in August anyhow. August, what's 3rd and 4th, whatever.
3rd and 4th.
MP Ming?
Shorty. Good morning, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you for your wise comments. Some in the House are delusional, but
Yes.
don't be running my mouth this year on that topic. First of all, I'd like to extend thoughts and prayers to the family of, and I know it's already been done, but I'm adding to that for Shirley Granville Gibbons and to his family, and to especially to his wife, Miss Gardine, also known as Gardy Gibbons. I'm just letting them know that they're in our thoughts and prayers at this difficult time. I'd also like to do a big shout out to a young lady, Teray Toll. She is a student and she's been granted funds to do a study on cultural appropriation. She didn't say too much about it because she said she's unable to, but we do know that she has been granted that.
It's Reverend Toll's daughter?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know the mom's name. I don't know her dad's name. But she, we wish her all the best. And I believe that this is just the start of the wonderful and great things that this young lady will do, because she is keen, she is bright, and she's definitely engaged. And I can just say that we look forward to what it is she's going to do for Bermuda in terms of putting us on the map, or even bringing her work and her studies back here. And I'd also like to add to the comments for East End Primary School, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Excellence doesn't even seem to equate to how wonderful this school play was, and not just in terms of the performance, that what the children learned. A brand new teacher that came into their system, music and drama teacher, Miss Alana, they call her, and she was excellent in what it is that she did. She actually taught the children their heritage, some things of what to do and what not to do, how the village actually controls the town in terms of, it was a small skit on skipping, children who skip school, and how everybody and the mama's uncle saw them, and by the time they got home, your mom was there waiting for you with that little swatch. Actually, you had to go pick your swatch to get your cocktail with.
Stinging nettles.
But yes, but to say all of that would be, it was an amazing performance. We who are spectators thoroughly enjoyed it, but we would know that that goes without saying that it had to be organized by someone. And so to the teachers, the faculty, the staff, the parents, and especially the students, job well done.
Thank you, MP Ming. And the chair recognize the honorable member Anthony Richardson.
Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker, and to the listening audience and my colleagues. I want to declare my interest, as others have done, and give recognition to a young lady, a young woman, who is 24 years old and has two passions. One is the assisting children, special ed children, and animals. And what she has done, she's an actual para-educator in the public school system. But what she has done for this summer is have what she calls a summer companion camp. And I think it's absolutely brilliant, because what she decided amongst herself is to bring those two things together. Her summer camp is going to involve children between the ages of 6 and 11. And during the summer camp, they can bring the animals with them, bring the dogs and stuff with them. And what she knows is that you can actually overwhelmed in terms of the number of people that came out to wish him well on his return. His sister came back with him, and it was just absolutely amazing when he came back yesterday evening. And even for him to, again, just exude such tenacity after the challenges he's going through. He has a long road to recovery for sure, but the fact that he has remained so positive, really just a tremendous inspiration.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, and it's difficult because when we mention some people, it's almost as if you're leaving out others, but I'm not doing that. I just want to make sure I do give belated birthday congratulations to Violet Shaves, who is now 93, and her birthday was last weekend. And her daughter Charlene, actually, which is why I mentioned this too, because her daughter Charlene grew 65 and she went 93. And so I thought it was quite amazing. And then to Miss Rhoda Jones and Miss Beverly Tolbert, who are all celebrating birthdays and are very, very influential in the Davos Hill community and give tremendous support to all that we do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? There appear to be none. Next order of business is matters of privilege, non-personal explanations, notice of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. There are none. Introduction of bills. There are none. Government bills. Minister Haber.
Mr. Speaker, I am introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. The Child Daycare Allowance Amendment Act 2023.
Thank you, Minister. Opposition bills? There are none. Private members' bills? None. Notices of motion? You have one, Minister Haber?
Mr. Acting Speaker, I hereby give notice that at the next day of meeting, I will move the following motion be approved. Be it resolved that this honorable House supports the Economic Development Strategy Bermuda 2023-2027 as tabled by the Minister of Economy and Labor on the 16th of June, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Hayward. Orders of the day. Second reading from Minister of Tourism, Mr. Campbell, MP Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I move that the bill entitled the Personal Information Protection Amendment Act 2023 be now read the second time.
Continue.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Personal Information Protection Amendment Bill provides for amendments to the Personal Information Protection Act 2016, known as PIPA, as well as to the Public Access to Information Act 2010, known as PETI, and the Public Access to Information Regulations 2014, known as PETI regulations, to harmonize PIPA, PETI, and the PETI regulations in respect of personal information. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the aim of the PIPA is to put the control over the use of personal information into the hands of individuals where it rightly belongs. Privacy legislation, also referred to as data protection or informational privacy, provides for an important human right and forms a critical building block in the creation of a successful information society. Mr. Deputy Speaker, PIPA was designed to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals relating to the use of their personal information. PIPA places duties on the use of personal information by organizations in Bermuda, including public authorities. The administrative provisions enabling the appointment of the Privacy Commissioner and the creation of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner are currently in force. The remaining operative provisions of PIPA will be brought into force on the 1st of January, 2025. Mr. Deputy Speaker, privacy is often confused with public access to information or freedom of information. They have similarities, but are quite different. They both provide important rights to access information. PETI gives the public the right to request access to records and information held by public authorities. PIPA provides rights for individuals to access and control the use of their personal information by all organizations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that said, PETI and PIPA together provide Bermuda with a robust information rights framework. In essence, the government has established a framework that creates transparency and accountability with respect to information held by organizations and provides rights of access. First, with the implementation of PETI for government-held records, and now with PIPA creating responsibilities for all organizations, including the government, regarding the use of personal information. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once the remaining portions of PIPA are enacted, it will govern the use of all personal information in Bermuda by organizations. As a result, conflicting and overlapping provisions currently found in PADI and PADI Regulations 2014 will require deletion or amendment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, PADI provides the public with access to records held by public authorities. At this time, this allows individuals to request access to their own personal information and to request amendments to this personal information that is held by public authorities. PADI also provides a definition of personal information, and exemptions from disclosure are in place to protect personal information from disclosure subject to a public interest test. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill will resolve the conflicting and overlapping provisions currently found in PADI and the PADI Regulations 2014 with the PIPA to ensure one definition of personal information and one legislative regime to request and correct one's own personal information. Mr. Deputy Speaker, once PIPA is in force, individuals will access and amend their own personal information via PIPA. Therefore, a few changes will be made to PADI in respect to this. An addition will be made to PADI Section 12, which is access to records, to ensure that after the commencement of Part 3, Rights of Individuals of PIPA, applications for an individual's own personal information will be made exclusively under PIPA. Therefore, there will not be a gap in access to one's personal information from public authorities once this bill is enacted. Individuals will continue to have access to records of their personal information via PADI until the PIPA Rights of Individuals commences. Mr. Deputy Speaker, additional amendments to PADI include Section 19, which is the request to amend the record of personal information, will no longer be necessary, as amendments to a record of a person's own information will take place via PIPA. Sections that will no longer be relevant when personal information requests are managed via PIPA will be removed. These include Section 23(2)A, requests for records of their own information, Section 23(3) to 5, specific conditions where records of a person's own information might not be released, Section 41F, internal review of a decision to refuse to amend a record in respect of a person's personal information, and Section 58(2)B, the requirement for the Information Commissioner to report on requests to amend records of personal information. The definition of personal information in Section 24 will follow the definition included in PIPA to align the two acts. And finally, the Privacy Commissioner will be added to PADI Section 4 application and the PADI schedule because there was no Privacy Commissioner at the time when PADI came into force. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the PADI regulations also have several paragraphs relating to requests and amendments of personal information. The following will be removed. Section 12, application for access to personal information. Section 14, form of application. Section 15, manner of amending personal records. Section 16, manner of annotating personal records. Section 17A, information officer's role in confirming identity of a person requesting access to their personal information. Section 21, requests on behalf of a minor. Schedule 3, application for amendment or annotation of a record, and the reference to requests for personal information in Schedule 1 as they would be covered by PIPA. Mr. Deputy Speaker, moving on to PIPA amendments, they relate primarily to Part 5, supervision, and Part 6, general provisions, parts of the Act. A paragraph has been added to the end of Section 26 to clarify when the Privacy Commissioner's office becomes vacant, including expiry of the appointment period, resignation in writing to the governor by the commissioner, if the commissioner becomes a senator, a candidate for election to the House of Assembly, or an office holder in any political party. And finally, removal of the commissioner from the office by the governor. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Piper Section 37 provides a change to 6 months rather than 3 months for the Privacy Commissioner to complete the annual report at the end of the year. Finally, amendments to Section 52 allows for commencement of provisions of the Act for different purposes and in respect of different classes of organization. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Bermuda, we live in a small, caring community where being neighborly and sharing information is a natural part of life. Although we may know a lot about each other, we all have an expectation of privacy. As we prepare our organizations for the commencement of Piper on the 1st of January 2025, we bring on a culture shift within the small community of ours, this small community of ours. It will change the way we perceive personal information and its value. Both individuals and organizations will start thinking about personal information in the same way that we think about money. It is a precious commodity and should be protected across all organizations in Bermuda. PADI has played a beneficial role in providing access to our personal information held by public authorities. As Piper comes into force, these two acts will continue to complement one another. Guidance and related information will be published by the Office of the Privacy and the Offices of the Privacy and Information Commissioners and the government as procedures evolve. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in closing, Piper is designed to meet international best practice. It is a modern, pragmatic piece of legislation balancing comprehensive protection with sensible regulation that is appropriate for Bermuda. While providing protection of personal information locally is of great importance, Piper has also been drafted with a broader perspective in mind, as it seeks to raise Bermuda to a level that will enable it to join the international network of trust currently existing between countries with similar levels of informational privacy protection. This network increases trust between individuals and users of personal information while providing significant advantages for international businesses and local businesses who would like to compete in global markets. Many of these countries have both PADI and Piper type legislation that have been working together in tandem for decades. The Personal Information Protection Amendment Bill aids in implementing a similar regime in Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any further speakers? The chair recognizes the honourable member, Jarius Richardson. Mr. Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think we have to start this contribution with noting how important personal information protection legislation is. The right to privacy, and first of all, I should say the right to privacy is vital. As it stands right now, we need to make sure that our information can't be used by others, can't be used for nefarious purposes. Indeed, in my world, where we look at transnational organized crime quite frequently, a big part of privacy legislation is to make sure that those groups can't get hold of information, thereby selling it on or using it again to commit further crimes. In Bermuda, we're fairly lucky. We're not on a continental landmass. We're pretty far away from everybody else. So cyber criminals and the like don't see us as a very useful target. There's only about 60,000 of us, so to speak. And that means that that these enterprises, which require typically to be profitable to gather hundreds of thousands of data points on individuals, it's just not enough people in Bermuda. But with that being said, we are connected in a digital world. So it's absolutely crucial that we have privacy legislation and information legislation that protects personal information. Now, our biggest problem with this particular regime is that the substantive portions of it are in fact not in force. And so in this legislation to date, passed in 2016, it is a great idea, but it's an idea that has not yet come to pass. And this is exceptionally dangerous for us in Bermuda. The honorable member mentioned, for example, that we like to do business in a cross-border nature. And that means that other jurisdictions where there is robust privacy legislation, it puts us at a disadvantage, typically during due diligence processes on deals and things like that. When they say, well, how are you going to handle our information? Well, all of a sudden, the Bermuda side of that deal, for all intents and purposes, looks bad. Obviously, there's ways around that, but we really need this legislation to be brought into force. And I do mean yesterday. And equally, there are organizations in Bermuda that are in possession of our personal information. And this is, they right now do not have a regulatory framework which dictates how they're going to handle that information, how they're going to safeguard that information, and giving us rights to amend or have that information deleted. Again, this is something we've seen globally developing now for some 10, 15 years. So we really are behind the 8 ball on this one and need to get this done right away. This also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, comes to point, case in point, I should say, after COVID. We obviously had a once in a generation pandemic. We passed legislation that told, that required the collection of information from a lot of different places, a lot of different people, even going into the hands of private sector with ResQuest. And so right now we have private sector individuals holding onto personal information without this regulatory framework in place. And that can only lead to trouble. So what we need to do is get this regulatory framework in force, in place, to make sure that that information is being dealt with appropriately. As it stands right now, there's too many people holding on to our information who simply are not ready. With that being said, there are private sector individuals, especially in financial services, who have been working deliberately and diligently to adapt to the pending legislation. They're already typically exposed to other privacy legislation in other jurisdictions. So, for example, in Canada, or they're subject to GDPR or General Data Protection Regulations in the European Union, and all those similar instruments. So because they're already used to it, they've gone ahead and launched all these projects. And so they've moved the ball down the road, and other organizations in Bermuda have not had such similar motivation and may be behind the 8 ball. So yet again, we need the legislation, because the legislation will allow us to then make sure that guidance notes are issued, and those guidance notes will tell those organizations exactly what to do with our information. So this is key. So in general, we support the ball moving further down the road as it relates to PIPA. We do have some thoughts as it relates to the legislation itself, and we'll attend to that in committee. And some of these are quite important. I would just ask the minister in this portion of the debate then to explain why there are changes to this bill. If the bill is to come, or I should say, if PIPA is to come into force on 1 January 2025, which I believe is what he said, there seems to be transitional provisions that relate to a phased approach. So I'm not quite sure why we have both a firm date and a phased approach. If the minister can answer that. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, MP Richardson. The chair recognizes the Honorable Jose Adams. You have the floor, Ms. Adams.
No, right? Been there before. Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to be long this afternoon, because you will recall that PIPA was supported by the Progressive Labor Party whilst in opposition, because I believe both sides of the aisle talking to me? Oh, sorry. Sorry, both sides of the aisle see its value and importance. Mr. Speaker, if I were to ask my cousin MP Simmons Wade her weight or her age, besides the dirty looks, I'm sure you can imagine the type of response I would receive is that it's none of my business. And so it speaks to a level of understanding that many of us were taught at an earlier age, is that when it's involving someone's personal information, certain things are meant to be private and protected. And you see, that is what PIPA is designed to do. It is designed to protect the rights of individuals in relation to the use of their personal information. I do find it interesting, however, that when we're discussing PIPA, because it comes at a time when people are willingly sharing their personal information over the internet and social media. I know what people are eating. I know where they're staying. I know where they're working. I know who their friends and family are. I even know what bank they use. You see, because if my cousin Jimmy was to write on a tweet on Twitter to express how upset he is that Clarion Bank has increased the mortgage rate, it's pretty safe to assume now that I know where cousin Jimmy has his mortgage. And if the very next day, cousin Jimmy puts on Instagram a Father's Day post with him and his son, and he has a Digicel uniform on, now I know who his son is, and I know where he works. Absolutely. Mr. Speaker, I smile because we are discussing the protection of personal information at a time when people are voluntarily sharing their personal information more than ever before. Nonetheless, in these times, it is incumbent upon the government to do all that it can to ensure an individual's information is protected. And so I certainly thank the minister for progressing forward with PIPA. Mr. Speaker, as we know, Bermuda is a small community. And I've personally heard of instances where intimate and personal information, such as someone's financial troubles or their medical conditions, are held by organizations only to be shared by someone who works on that organization without that individual knowing or consenting. And so while not always done with malintent, the consequences, as you can imagine, can be embarrassing, can be frustrating, and even present risks to both the individual and the business. And so therefore, progressing forward with privacy legislation is critically important. Mr. Speaker, I also take note of the minister's press conference yesterday, where he announced that PIPA will come into full effect in January of 2025. And I believe once in full effect, it will completely change the landscape of how personal information is used in Bermuda. And so I would encourage the public to get familiar with PIPA because it is real and it is coming. I'm also grateful for the establishment of the Privacy Commissioner's Office. And I'm glad he had an opportunity at the press conference to speak on what he has been working on thus far. And I believe the commissioner, now has the opportunity during the upcoming 18 months to continue to educate the people of Bermuda on the details of PIPA and what it means to protect an individual's personal information. Mr. Speaker, you see, the reality is that there are common practices when dealing with someone's personal information that people may think is no big deal. Come January of 2025 will be a direct violation. And so it is essential that given that over the next 18 months, we are in effect providing giving the public 18 months of notice to charities, to clubs, to associations now have the responsibility to protect an individual's personal information. Responsibility is the key word, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
And so, Mr. Speaker, if I can speak specifically to this bill for a moment, I think this is a clear step forward in moving the government closer to the full implementation of PIPA. I think it's common sense and appropriate for individuals to be able to access and amend their personal information under the Personal Information Protection Act and no longer under PATI. And so as we progress forward with PIPA, I support the changes that will allow for this to take place. I also recognize that with the proposed changes to PATI, which removes the ability for an individual to access and amend their personal information under the Act, and with PIPA not being fully implemented, this bill provides a provision for persons to access their own personal information during this gap period. And I think that is key, specifically for this bill. And I'm also pleased to see that this bill draws a clearer line between persons having access to their government records and having access and control over their personal information. So again, Mr. Speaker, don't intend to be long, so I'll wrap up with this. The Progressive Labor Party has been supportive of PIPA. We now have a date as to when we expect this to be in full effect. And this bill helps us with that transition. And so in a world where hundreds or thousands and even millions of persons can have access to personal information simply at the click of a button, I'm encouraged to see that this government is doing or progressing forward in protecting both our businesses and our individuals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Adams. Are there any further speakers? The chair recognizes the Honorable Cole Headley Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we in the One Bermuda Alliance support this bill, which makes consequential amendments to the Public Access to Information Act 2010 and the PATI Act regulations of 2014. And it also gives the minister the power to make further consequential and related amendments to the act. Mr. Speaker, in essence, what it does, it cleans up the overloaded Public Access to Information Act of 2010. Mr. Speaker, administratively, it cleans up both acts and clearly segregates the two acts, the PATI Act and the PIPA Act. The legislature allows the minister to, in essence, bring different sectors of the community on board at different times based on their preparation and based on their transition to complying with the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we know that international business might be well prepared for data privacy compliance. They are under obligations of other jurisdictions, other foreign jurisdictions like the UK, EU, and Canada, based on where their business is transacted. And so they not only have to be comfortable with what's going on in Bermuda, but they have to be comfortable with the jurisdictions in which they are transacting business. Mr. Speaker, the legislation is great because, in essence, it guarantees our citizens' rights to privacy, as in many jurisdictions like Switzerland, the EU, and Canada. In addition, the Privacy Act is basically putting an individual in control of information about themselves. And again, we in the opposition support this endeavor. Individuals will have more control over their information and how it's used and controlled. In addition, they will also be regulators of their own information. Someone said, with this legislation coming to being, in essence, I read someone say we could possibly have 60,000 regulators because each person is in control of his or her own information.
Yes.
And this can be bad. The information included is healthcare information, as was said earlier, travel information, vaccination information, spending information, and physical attributes information. Again, very, very sensitive information. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we have to ensure that the personal information rights is managed in the electronic form, and hard copies are held for all business organizations, charities, and departments. Mr. Speaker, a recurring question that occurs is, where will this electronic information be held? Where will the service be held? Because there's so much information involved. And how are these servers and these files protected from cyber threats? Mr. Speaker, as an international financial financial center, our business people are forced again to remain abreast with continuous changing landscape of PIPA regulations. And these are also embedded in the AML legislation, the ATF legislation, the Know Your Client regulations, the FACA regulations, the BAPSA regulations, and Common Reporting Standards regulations. So it's all intertwined in international business. Mr. Speaker, in addition, there are the EU General Data Protection Regulations, which have been adopted by the EU to protect their EU citizens. So again, we have to apply the EU legislation if we're doing business in the EU or we're transacting information from EU nationals. Again, it's not just Bermuda. So again, we support these endeavors. Mr. Speaker, at home here in Bermuda, PIPA will be coming into force, as the minister said, 2025. There was initially a scheduled approach based on the preparedness of the industries or the businesses involved. But he, and I applaud him for doing that, he said it all has to be in place by 2025. Obviously, the large businesses, the IB businesses, are probably okay with that because they have the capital and resources to make it happen. Our concern is with the smaller business, the mom and pop shops who gather this information, who are in difficult times already and are challenged from an economic sustainability point of view. And they would probably need support and guidance in this space. Mr. Speaker, questions for all organizations that collect and use personal information is, are you administratively ready to comply with PIPA? How will you secure the consent necessary to collect and use the personal data? How will you manage communications with individuals who want to see a copy of all personal information that you have about them? How will you manage their requests for corrections or deletions of personal data? To what extent must you revise your outsourcing and data processing service agreements? Because a lot of these companies, they outsource to other jurisdictions, be they small companies or larger companies, because they find it more efficient, more proficient, and more economic to outsource these services. And again, these service level agreements have to be updated accordingly based on the evolution of legislation that we have here today. Mr. Speaker, the other question that I want to ask organizations and businesses and charities, are you organized to comply with an individual's direction for you to stop using their personal data? Because sometimes we have these systems that are in place that are challenged when you say, take my name off, take all the information of the file. And some systems cannot do it. And so how will you manage that? Are you also prepared to review all business processes with a view of possibly revising or re-engineering them so that they are PIPA compliant processes? Mr. Speaker, As indicated above, the above questions are easily addressed for local and international companies as they have the resources and capital to become PIPA compliant. As I said, I shared my concerns with the small companies, and I repeat it. What happens to our local small businesses who are just making it during the challenging economic times? These PIPA protocols and requirements will place additional financial and resource burdens on their already stretched businesses. How can they be supported? Will they be penalized because they cannot afford the new requirements at this time? Where would these small businesses like health stores, pharmacies, retail stores, pharmacies, retail, massage service, where will they go to get support? And how will that information be stored if they don't have the infrastructure to do so? And then let's look at the people. You and I, the individual's perspective. How will we be comforted knowing that the personal data will only be processed after we give permission? How will we feel that the necessary data is collected for processing only, for specific processes? And is the data current or up to date? And where will the data be kept? And the question that comes up again, how long will you keep my data? Will it be kept for 5 years or 10 years? These are questions that individuals should have answers to. And then and also, as mentioned earlier, as an individual, will my data be exposed to criminal threats or commercial threats? In addition, there are concerns about government issues, like, you're traveling, you have biometric data. You go through airports, they take a scan of your face, they take a scan of your passport, and where does that information end up, Mr. Speaker? So these are concerns that we have. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we support the legislation. The impact of these amendments are very, very complex for Bermuda, and yet they are required and should be endorsed so that individual privacy rights are protected and honored. Mr. Speaker, just as an add-on, someone said to me when we were talking about this legislation, Switzerland has the privacy rights embedded in their constitution. One question whether the government will be willing to enshrine our privacy data rights into Bermuda's constitutions, just a question. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, this is a very complex piece of legislation. It impacts many, many stakeholders, but it is necessary, and we in the One Bermuda Alliance support this endeavor because individual rights must be protected for the benefit of individuals and the security of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Opposition Leader Kuro Heli-Simons. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member Neville Tyrrell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Acting Speaker. Thank you very much for recognizing me. I certainly rise to support the Personal Information Protection Amendment Bill and want to compliment the minister for bringing it forward and thank he and his tactical officers as well. Let me say that I'm happy to hear that the opposition are fully supporting this bill. So most of my comments that I had, I'll keep them very brief, but there are some things that I certainly would like to point out that I think the general public needs to be reminded of. The first thing that comes to mind is that this amendment bill brings harmonization to both the PIPA, yes, and the Public Access to Information Act of 2010. So obviously we are doing our homework in updating and correcting things that possibly are needed as a result of some experiences, I'm sure, since 2010. And I think the fact that we're amending this bill should certainly highlight to organizations in Bermuda about personal information that is being kept, and certainly give it a higher profile in terms of the privacy of the information that they have. And I'm certainly impressed with the fact that it provides more rights, and I'm used the word more rights to individuals in terms of how their personal information is actually used. I certainly agree that it will govern the use of a personal information in Bermuda because, as I said, people need to know where their information is being kept and how it actually being kept, and given them the right to access the records held by public authorities in the event that they need to amend any information. I'm just looking at my notes just to make sure I've covered everything, because most of what I said, what I wanted to say has already basically been said. And again, I make the point that individuals would have access and be able to amend their records as well. When, of course, now when this bill comes into force, and I'm sure it will be today, the two acts will continue to complement one another, that is the PIPA and the Public Information Act. So having noted that these amendments are in line with international best practices, that gives people, I think, a warmer feeling. And again, I give my full support to this, and I actually encourage the public and organizations to educate themselves, prepare themselves for this legislation, and get on board prior to January 2025. So I will end here, and again, thank the minister for bringing this legislation, and again, offer my full support to it. Thank you very much. Mr.
Thank you, MP Tira. Any further speakers? The chair recognizes Honorable Member Anthony Richardson. You have the floor.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Acting Speaker. Good afternoon. Just want to use the opportunity to hopefully emphasize the impact to us as individuals. I always like to think of the fact of what we do here, whatever session we're in, has an impact on the general public, and to hopefully help everyone to understand how that applies. And so today, Mr. Acting Speaker, I'll use, I think it's 2 or 3 examples to hopefully highlight the impact. One, which is, I guess, very recent in the public arena, is the, I would say, proposed investment of Argus into BF&M. Another one is from my banking experience in terms of the ability for banks to track how you spend your money. And the third one would be how we give out our personal information for regular transactions. And I think I gave the example last week in terms of an employee was moving from one apartment to the other, and the new landlord wanted to know what his pay was, for example, and wanted 3 pay stubs. And I said no, and instead gave a summary report, because that again is it's personal information. And to be honest, I don't think it's directly relevant to your ability to afford to live in an apartment in terms of your individual monthly rent, as opposed to what is a general statement as in terms of your income. The second one, which is again much more topical, is this proposed investment of Argus into BF&M. And I use that example because in some discussion, that was some of the concern, is if an insurance company is now going to have even more access, will, for example, Argus have the cross information that is existing at BF&M, and therefore be able to make better decisions? And the response was, well, no, be mindful of the fact that they themselves, Argus in this instance, would have in place certain parameters to make sure that the information can be managed. However, from the public's perspective, it'll be making sure that we understand more definitively how that would work. And that then ties into general information when it comes to your healthcare, because you'll be surprised that if you go to a doctor, for example, right, your information is held by the doctor. The doctor's office has staff who have access to your information. And then your information has to be transferred to the insurance company for a claim. And so along that entire pathway, there is the opportunity for the information to be quote unquote leaked out. And let's say, for example, you have some, I don't know, communicable disease that you would not want to have in the public arena. It can easily go that route. And so my point today is to certainly support the PIPA legislation because it'll help us all as a society to better understand how damaging information can be if it is leaked out. I will also refer back to what one of the previous speakers said in that we have to, in this whole arena, take more responsibility for what we even voluntarily share. Because I've said in many cases that because of the way that we now volunteer our information, I know that you, Mr. Speaker, are away for 2 weeks, which means guess what? Your house is now vulnerable. Or I know where you're being. So there's so much stuff that we give out. And today, I think, is the time for us to start to realize that the information can be tied together and therefore cause a problem for you. And so for the individuals, myself included, of course, is to be more mindful. From my experience, which is always interesting, is at the banking level, because we now use credit cards and debit cards so easily, you'll be surprised at how you can actually track somebody's movements simply by their spending. You can just look at the credit card information, for example, and you see exactly where they've moved. You would even know some time ago, there was some concern around the individual gaming machines. And you could see, for example, that somebody went out on a Friday night and there are all these withdrawals for, say, $20, which means, and you know where they're spending the money, right? And so you can track these things. And so it really is important for us to understand this whole idea of information. What concerns me also is when you sign up to many websites, or you go there just for a quick look, and they say, guess what? We now use cookies to track things. Do you agree, yes or no? If it's no, you can't access the website sometimes. So you have to be very careful because then they take the information and they're able to put it together and say, okay, fine. If Anthony looks for, I don't know, a green shirt, what do other people looking for green shirts also look for? And therefore they combine the information and that then becomes valuable information to people that are selling different things. And so that's why we then get all these actual emails, which we never asked for, but it's to promote different things. And so there's a huge tie-in to how people can take supposedly small bits of information, tie them together, and then they become very, very important in terms of managing and in some cases abusing your circumstance. Recently, there was a lot of conversation in the media again in terms of elder abuse. And the same thing applies because your information is sometimes in the public arena and others can then determine what you do and how you are vulnerable and therefore exploit that. The final example I'll give, Mr. Speaker, is, which is quite, I would say, relevant to me now, is providing information because I have 2 children and sometimes they may apply for a scholarship or university and all these things. And we would be surprised if we focus on what is even asked for when it comes to a scholarship application. They want to know all kinds of things. And sometimes what I end up doing is say, well, no, don't apply because the information they're asking for is not directly relevant, but then they actually disqualify you from the application. And what has also happened recently is even when it comes to the KYC information for anti-money laundering and all the rest of it, the banks, in my mind, are abusing that process and they're asking for things which are not, like, they're totally irrelevant. And so the unfortunate argument arises is a worker is asking for information that they have been told together. You say, no, it's not relevant. And there's an extended discussion because sometimes you cannot even get a bank account opened without giving what they think is relevant, which is not really relevant. And so it takes a long time for us to get that sorted out. And so, again, I think it's going to be important for there to be more information around what is necessary as opposed to what I want. And then if it's necessary, make sure that you can tie it into what you're doing, because in some cases it's not. And I would say now that for the businesses is to have a more refined process in determining what they're asking for before they ask. And the other example is when you apply for almost anything nowadays, they say, well, send me a utility bill as proof of residence, which is ridiculous in some respects, because where I stay is actually not tied to my ability to pay all the rest of it. And so I think from these comments, it's a matter for all of us, as MP Carol Simon said, is to understand the comprehensiveness and significance of this legislation and make sure that we are ready for it both individually and, I guess, commercially, because many of us are giving up information voluntarily that we don't have to give up, and some businesses are asking for things that they don't need, and by doing so, they're actually increasing the risk. And it's going to be important in my mind to see how we proactively manage all this information that's stored somewhere, not knowing who really has access to it. And it was interesting, even last night, I think it was, or yesterday, on the
Mr.
news, right?
Richardson, it's
Time?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll finish off by saying that it's important for everybody to really understand the significance and the impact of this legislation and govern ourselves accordingly. Thank you.
Mr. Acting Speaker, I move that we adjourn for lunch until 2 p.m.
We will adjourn until 2 p.m. Everyone have a great lunch.